I'd like to start by sharing about who I am and where do I come from and where do I get my perspectives from, because I think that, they're definitely informed by how I grew up, the people that I had access to, and all of that. So I was born in 1983. I was just short of being born free in a hospital in Germiston. And shortly after I was born, my parents were still studying, and they left me with an older woman who was related to the family in Zondi, in Soweto. And that was a tricky time. I think it scared me, and I think it continues to scare me thinking about that time and those kinds of relations that I had at the time. So I grew up in Zondi. Shortly after, my parents came and fetched me, luckily, eventually. And we moved. We moved to Bruma, this townhouse in Bruma. My mom was working as a receptionist at Sony. There used to be a Sony building there by Eastgate. I'm not sure if you remember. And my dad was a waiter at the hotel that's very close by there as well. And we lived there for about maybe a year or two or so. My dad became abusive. He became an alcoholic, and he became physically abusive, and so they split up. My parents split up. We left in the middle of the night. He hit my mom often, but there was one night where I stayed up very late to kind of show him this thing I'd made at school, and I was very excited about this drawing. And he came, it was about 10 o'clock, and he came home and then why are you still up? And he hit me. I think he kicked me down the passage. That same night, my mom took everything we owned in black plastic bags, pillows, clothes, plates, toys, our whole lives. We loaded them into black plastic bags. We called an uncle, he came with a bakkie, and we left. And we went to Katlohong, Kledi section in Katlohong. And that's where most of my childhood was spent. I was very timid and shy, and I kept to myself, and and that was a thing as well. I think my mom was very much pushing for me to go outside. I think, she was saying, what kind of a boy is going to stay indoors the whole time? And she was very much, go play with other kids, go be outside, And I think I grew this weird relationship of outside and other people and gender from there as well. My grandfather was an interesting character as well. It was many years after living in Katlohong that I was told this story. So I knew that my grandmother had died. My mom was about 7 when my grandmother passed away. But years, almost 10 years later, I was told the story. So my grandfather killed her. There was an abusive relationship there too. But she was fascinating. I mean, her story is not that she died, right? She grew up in the Eastern Cape, and she was very fair-skinned, and my grandfather used to say, "Kile colored," you know what I mean? I said, how colored people are, they drink and they swear and whatnot, is what he was saying, And so there was this way of pushing up against her and problematizing her all the time, even in her death, in a way. But she was brilliant. She went to an English grammar school in Lesotho. I think it's called Little Angel Falls or something like that. And she learned English and typing and all the rest of that. So, if Kakum Shad, you understand. You understand where it comes from. And she worked for Alloreens as a typist, and she was brilliant, and she was given many, many promotions, and it blows my mind when I think about this, but during apartheid, my grandmother hired a domestic worker. And that complicated my idea of that time. It complicated my idea of women in apartheid, of black women in apartheid, and what kinds of agency that they had and what they could do. I mean, she bought my grandfather a car. She bought him an emerald green Mercedes-Benz. And I often just really? You could do all of this, living in all of this death and all of this fear and all of this hatred and all of that, the disenfranchisement. So that's my grandmother. My mom, after some years living in Katlohong, she remarried to my stepdad, and together, all of us, we left and we moved to Boksburg. Boksburg was also a complicated space. I think in my mind, it's racist. I'm trying to find a different word. But it was scary. I remember this one time, I had a little bicycle and I was riding around the blocks and whatever, And this one moment, this family was standing, I think they saw me come down, and they waited for me to come back up, and then when I came back up, they opened the gate and their dogs chased me, and I was hugely terrified, you know. So it was a complicated time. And I grew a lot of unfair traumas about gender, about race, and other things like that. I mean, eventually we moved to Dean, which is very close by to that townhouse called Bruma, where we lived with my biological father. And that was interesting too because of class, you know, so it was a suburb. I was in grade 7, I was in grade 7 at the time, going to school, Moko, in Kensington. Yeah, and you know, Kahuletsi Zondi is my identity. But here I am in this suburb, and again, terrified of going outside, but for different reasons now, you know, Tsabamahoa and all of that kind of thing, and you know, yeah, still precocious, still scared, still, you know what I mean. And I went to a boys' school after that. I went to Jeppe High School for Boys, or Jeppe War School for Science. And that was a very, very telling time in terms of my perspectives on gender. I think Jeppe Boys is a historically British school. It used to be a British grammar school, an elite and one of the oldest boys' schools in Johannesburg. So, you know, I mean, it's not particularly elite compared to the St. John's and the Ingings and what's. But for where I come from, it was yay, you know? But they had a very clear project at Jeppe Boys. It was about creating men. It wasn't a secret. You could be suspended if you weren't playing a sport. If you didn't have a summer sport and a winter sport, you must be playing a sport. Cultural activities, you know, that's your business. But rugby was huge, basketball was coming up, especially for black boys. Basketball was really, really big, and I enjoyed basketball. I enjoyed rugby as well. I enjoyed playing, you know what I mean. But it was also very clear, okay, you know, masculinity is important here. You must become this thing. You must stand up like this. When you sit down, you must button up. You know what I mean? Sorry, when you sit down, you do your jacket. When you stand up, you know what I mean? And it's funny, I mean, to this day, I still have those things, those conservative, old school, traditional things, you know, about, you know, what color shoe can you wear at what time? You can't wear brown shoes after 5, whoa. You know what I mean? And the different ties you tie, you know, for different occasions. If you're going just to have fun, you can tie a bit of a creative tie, but if you're going, you know what I mean? So all of those things about masculinity and being and how you dress up for it. Yeah, and I identified as a boy. I had very jock perspectives, you know, especially about women. And I think that's really fascinating for me, thinking about when you go to a boys' school, you're obsessed with girls because they're specifically not there. You know what I mean? That's, you know? And so there's this tied connection, you know? And so everything that was being taught about being a man, I began imagining that the opposite must be womanness then. You know, so if man is about integrity and respect and properness, then girls must be about, or women must be about freedom and other things like that. And I was jealous of women. I was jealous about that freedom. I was jealous of that emotional intimacy, you know, thinking about how, so I had siblings over that time as well, a brother and a sister. And I saw how my brother was put down very early on in his childhood, and he wasn't being picked up anymore. From around 3 or 4 or 4, you know? He wasn't held, he wasn't squeezed, he wasn't kissed on the face, you know what I mean? He wasn't cuddled at night. And my sister, complete opposite. You know? She always had access to hugs, to kisses, to care, to listening, to, you know, empathy and all of those things. And it created a very unfair kind of idea in my mind. Then I go to varsity. I get a NISFA scholarship. I apply for a law degree because I don't want to be poor again. I was traumatized by Katlohong, by Zondi, scared, really, really scared. You know, so what can I do that's going to secure financial security, you know? So again, these things are connected, like class, race, you know, all of them. But very quickly I got bored. I failed very easy courses like succession, so that's the law of where does your money go when you die? It's really a mind map of, oh, if it doesn't go here, then it goes there. If it doesn't go there, then it goes here. You know, simple course. I failed 3 times. Everybody was flying through it. I was there literally in final year, wearing the final year hoodie. You know that hoodie? doing your first year course session. And I think by the end they just let me pass. Like, you know what, it's fine, you know. What I enjoyed at that time though was writing. I enjoyed researching, research papers, interesting things. I think often it's the technical term is, what is it now? Critical legal realism. And it's the idea that law was not this pure science, you know. It's not a matter of the statute says this, the judge said that, it's pure and it's clean, you know. But it's not. It's complicated, it's political, it's cultural, it's colonial even, you know. We call the roots of our law in South Africa is called Roman Dutch law. Deeply political, tied to colonialism and you know what I mean, all of those things. And I enjoyed thinking about that and writing about that. So a lot of courses in that space. At the time I also was taking pictures and otherwise, but the relevant point I wanted to point out here was, I remember being introduced to feminism in varsity and thinking, okay, and then, what do you want with me? Like, okay, feminism, okay, sharp, women are equal, all right, what do you want from me? You know, what does it have to do with me at all, you know? It's called feminism with the fem in the name. And there's my friend, Tsepiso Serame, who said to me, sharp, then continue filling the prisons. Continue killing each other. Have you seen the homicide rate amongst men? It's spectacular. Continue dying, continue killing yourselves. You know, the suicide rate in men is huge. It's over the, you know? And I began then understanding that feminism is about all of us. Feminism is about all of our dignity. Feminism is about all of our freedom and our hopes for a fair future, an open future. You know what I mean? So that's who I am. I need a clicker. So today's workshop, as it mentioned, gender what? I feel very cheeky naming it that. The revolution will be intersectional or it will not be revolutionary. And I think that's important because, and I think as we go along, I'm hoping that we'll see that. This is an artwork by Tato Dweba, an artist who works in collage works, brilliant artist, flattened a curve on Instagram. And at work we commissioned this piece to reflect on the 2021 July unrest / riots / you know, and insurrection and things like that. And we were reflecting on the region of KwaZulu-Natal. We were reflecting on how this moment that we found ourselves in, where this baby was dropped from that burning building, is connected to so many other moments in our history. It's connected to the bus riots, it's connected to gender-based violence, and it's also connected to Marikana in terms of the class question, or the fight for fair wages, for livable wages and otherwise, you know? That we live our history. We live it now, and it's continuous, and it flows, and it ebbs in that way. So that's why I chose this picture here, because gender, similarly, is also deeply connected to these questions of history, of class, of race, of colonialism, and the struggles that we all say that we are fighting. I want to begin by asking us to be kind. Gender is a very sensitive topic for many of us. It goes to the very core of how we understand ourselves, how we understand each other. It's as tricky as religion to talk about. So I'm asking that as we have this workshop, as we talk, as we share ideas, as we test each other's assumptions and really interrogate each other, that we please be kind. I think it'll only be worthwhile, be constructive and otherwise if we're kind to each other in this conversation. I want to also speak about what we're not going to be covering. So I'm wanting to bring us all into this conversation. So often when we speak about gender, we make it a thing of trying to justify why women should have access to things, to life. I also don't want to make it a thing of trying to justify how or why queer people exist, because we're not in need of that kind of justification. What I want to talk about is all of us. So, and neither is it going to be about demonizing men. So often people are pushed away and don't want to talk about gender because they feel that it's going to be a man-hating exercise and how terrible men are. And I think those conversations are important around patriarchy and otherwise, but it's not about hating men. So in terms of a broad map, we're going to kind of begin talking about the thing that gender is, you know, look at the history of gender, conceptions of gender, and how it's connected to different things. Ne? We'll watch a short video, a 3-minute video shortly after that, and then we'll do a bit of an activity. Maybe not in that order, but broadly stated. From there, we're going to have a short activity where I'm going to ask guys to, what's the word now? To sit in different spaces, you know, and have conversations amongst ourselves about differences with other gender identities that are in this room. And then I'm going to ask us to come back together and to share what are these assumptions that we have about each other. And then we're going to have an opportunity to respond to these assumptions. And my hope is that we're going to be expelling, or you know what I mean, rubbishing this idea that we know what women want, we know what queer people want, we know what men want, what they look like and otherwise. But maybe we won't as well, you know, maybe it goes a different direction entirely. So that's what I'm hoping to do there. Yeah, and then we'll come to talk about gender and power. And I'll be speaking about things that have been happening and how gender is a system that perpetuates power. And many of us in this room are interested in fighting against power, especially capitalism, mainly in a very big way. Yeah, and exploring some of those histories, and also wanting very briefly to explore the thing that's been happening with the IAAF and what they've been doing to Caster Semenya. And I want us to kind of think about that, to talk about that, and unpack it and see, you know, gender and race, gender and colonialism, all of these things, and connect them together in that way. Yeah, and that'll mainly be the end of it, and at the end we'll have a Q&A where we can talk and ask questions otherwise. I'm about to begin, but I wanted to say, please stop me at any time if I've said something that needs explaining. If I'm talking too fast, I sometimes talk very fast. Let's be together, let's ask questions, let's engage. How do I want to do this? Okay, all right. Gender what? So, I think the conversations that we've been having in South Africa have really been pointing out that gender and sex are different things. We've gotten to this place now where we understand that sex is about your body, and the fundamentals of your body, I suppose, how you were assigned at birth and otherwise. I think there's space to push up against that, to critique that in many ways, but only to say that we understand that that's a different thing to gender. So if sex is about male and female, and intersex people, thank you very much. I would love to talk about that so much more, but yeah. And then gender is about man, women, queer, non-binary, and otherwise. So we've come to the space now that that's how we're understanding it. And I think that's fine. I have my own opinions, but I think that's a decent starting point. What I want to do is I want to go around the room, maybe picking 5 people to describe if an alien from another planet landed today here on Earth, and they didn't have gender on their planet, how would you describe the thing that gender is to them? I'm hoping there's a roaming mic, if we could please use that. Oh, thank you. I'm not sure if there are any volunteers, because I'm going to volunteer people myself. So do you want to save your friends? Anybody? I love that you're looking away. Can we start with vocals? Can you come here to the front? So the question is, an alien has just landed on planet Earth. What is gender?
Okay, I'll just, is it on?
I think it's...
I'll just take this. I'll just save it from this. I would say gender as a classification system. This being to an alien, I'd say it's how we rank our hierarchy here on Earth. Yeah.
You used an interesting word. You said hierarchy on Earth. And I love that because, yeah, we'll come. You know what? What I love about that is that what you're saying is that it's not two boxes, or, you know, in that horizontal, but it's this way. It's vertical, you know? And that there's a top, and there's a bottom, and there's a middle, and there's an otherwise. And so thank you so much for that. Oh, please, let.
Hello everyone. For me, for example, I believe that if you want to know the gender of that aliens, it depends where that alien's gonna land. So if it's gonna land in capitalist system, they're gonna relate it to capitalism. If they're gonna land in China, they're gonna relate it to Chinese. If they're gonna land in Arabic world or a Muslim country, they're gonna discover, like, it depends on the system and the country and the atmosphere that alien gonna end to.
Thank you. I think even those two perspectives are really fascinating. So here we're saying it doesn't matter what the body is, it doesn't matter what the sex is, you know? Gender is a different thing. And here we're saying it's about where. And I think that's so important, where you are. There are different ways of understanding gender based on different histories, and we'll touch on some of those as well. I think there was another hand that I couldn't see.
To my understanding, hi everyone. We are late, so sorry for being late. To my understanding, if an alien can just be Doho here in South Africa, I don't think. Especially here in South Africa, let me so like other countries, especially here in South Africa, in township. We came with young kids here, ne? They are doing primary school. Ne? I don't think if an alien can come and land to this country, our young generation that are growing up, I don't think that they can explain to that alien what is a gender is. I don't even think so, because in my mind right now, what they are teaching them at school, what I learned at school, gender is female and male. There's no difference there's no a specific word to explain gender. They don't teach us those things. Do you understand?
I do.
They don't give those things for it. No, if we talk about gender, we do not just talk about a female and a male. There is a lot in it. So, as for me, as I learned at school, gender is a female and a male.
I hear you. Thank you for that input. I think a lot of us were taught that, right? That's how many of us were told the thing that it is. It collapses gender into sex, and even then a binary understanding of what sex is, you know? So thank you for that perspective. Maybe one more? Thank you.
I think gender is how power is actually assigned into a particular body, and by power assigned into a particular body, I mean how power actually gets to function in materializing and actually configuring this body such that it actually becomes that there's this array of ranking where a particular body then actually gets to be situated at the top, others become subordinate of that particular kind of scenario. So it basically surfaces on how we disperse and how we actually embellish power to different kinds of these being for particular kinds of agendas that are actually supposed to be actually taken out.
Thank you so much for that. I think it relates very similar here, but I think you use the word a lot more directly, power. Can I please have that mic instead? You know, and I really appreciate that, because you weren't describing bodies, chromosomes, genitals. You were saying politics. Power is politics, you know? Money, you know? It determines so much about your future, your life. So we all have then similar, but also then different ways of leaning how we understand gender. I want to relate this to a story, a very old story, about, and again, listen, as old, the older stories are, the little bit more problematic they can become. So I'm hoping you'll be kind to me. It's not there anymore. Please be kind to me. I am reading. Yeah, food. It's not me. So the story is about 6 blind men discovering an elephant for the first time. And so it's been written in different ways. It exists in Hinduism, it exists in Buddhist philosophy, it's an ancient story. And the primary purpose of it, at least initially, was about how we contrast our own senses, that what the tools that we have to understand the world sometimes are very limited. But today we're going to be using it for our conversation. So it goes, so this is also then an interpretation of it by a writer in England, Godfrey Sachs, between 1816 and 1887. So it goes, "It was 6 men of Hindustan to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against a broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, 'God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall.' The second, feeling the tusk, cried, 'Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp. To me it is mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear.' The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, 'I see,' quoth he, 'the elephant is very like a snake.' The fourth reached out an eager hand and felt about the knee. 'What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain,' quoth he. ''Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree.' The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, 'Even the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can? This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan.' The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, 'I see,' quoth he, 'the elephant is very like a rope.'" And we can go on and on and on about it. But what I wanted to point out here is that how I understand gender is based on my experiences, based on things that I've been exposed to, based on my needs as well. What I need, in this world, and it informs very much how I understand gender. And I think that we all have pieces of the elephant, We're touching the hierarchy, we're touching the body, we're touching, you know what I mean? And so all of these perspectives inform how we understand what gender is. Could we please play the video? So this is a video by Judith Butler, a theorist and philosopher. And what she talks about is a very...
It's one thing to say that gender is performed, and that's a little different.
Thank you. So she wrote this book called Gender Trouble, and it was hugely influential in really expanding our ideas of gender. But I also want to say that this is also a part of the animal, right? I don't think any one of us can claim absolutely, at the end of the day, this is what it is and nothing else, So this is Judith Butler.
From saying gender is performative. When we say gender is performed, we usually mean that we've taken on a role, we're acting in some way, and that our acting or our role playing is crucial to the gender that we are and the gender that we present to the world. To say that gender is performative is a little different, because for something to be performative means that it produces a series of effects. We act and walk and speak and talk in ways that consolidate an impression of being a man or being a woman. I was walking down the street in Berkeley when I first arrived several years ago, and a young woman who was, I think, in high school leaned out of her window and she yelled, "Are you a lesbian?" And she was looking to harass me. Or maybe she was just freaked out, or she thought I looked like I probably was one and wanted to know. But instead I just turned around and I said, "Yes, I am." And that really shocked her. We act as if that being of a man or that being of a woman is actually an internal reality or something that's simply true about us, a fact about us. Actually, it's a phenomenon that's being produced all the time and reproduced all the time. So to say gender is performative is to say that nobody really is a gender from the start. I know it's controversial, but that's my claim.
Interesting, right?
Think about how difficult it is for sissy boys, or how difficult it is for tomboys to function socially without being bullied, or without being teased, or without sometimes suffering threats of violence, or without their parents intervening to say, maybe you need a psychiatrist, or why can't you be normal? So, you know, there are institutional powers like psychiatric normalization, and there are informal kinds of practices like bullying, which try to keep us in our gendered place. There's a real question for me about how such gender norms get established and policed, and what the best way is to disrupt them and to overcome the police function. It's my view that gender is culturally formed, but it's also a domain of agency or freedom. It's most important to resist the violence that is imposed by ideal gender norms, especially against those who are gender different, who are non-conforming in their gender presentation.
Fascinating, right? I think what was also interesting is how so many of our conversation touches on what Judith is saying, right? And I think it's really fascinating. I want to move now to a very short activity that one I described. I'm realizing it's not going to go the way I thought. Clearly everybody here seems to have a very expansive notion of the thing that gender is, but maybe let's do it anyways and see where we land, you know? Thank you. So this is called What Do They Want? I'm wondering how to do this because I think the space is a little bit tricky to move around in. So maybe then we can just kind of, hey! Maybe we can cut a cross section and we'll have 4 groups of people. Yeah? So maybe by the door there, just behind the person there with the bucket hat, that can become this line. And then of course the alley in the middle. And I'm hoping that we can have a discussion amongst ourselves, with each other for 20 minutes. Thinking about certain things. So I'm going to then assign, I was hoping for 3 groups and now there's 4. I don't know how to do this right now. But what I wanted to do is to assign each group a gender expression, a gender identity to think about. And to answer these questions, and if you can write them down on your phone or whatever else. It doesn't have to be long, it can be very, very short. But yeah, so thinking about the gender that you'll be assigned, which is such a traumatic thing. Can you think about what do they look like? What do they do? It could be work, it could be home roles and otherwise. What do they smell like? You know, what does that gender smell like? What do they behave like? You know, how do they walk? How do they stand? You know? What do they wear? You know? I wonder what each gender then is supposed to wear, or is wearing, or you know, actually wears. You know? And what do they want? To think about what they want. So I think instead of 20 minutes, let's spend 10 minutes on this. I also wanted to recognize Abashali. I think the work that you guys do is incredible. I've worked a little bit with Tapela Mohapi on a couple of projects, and so maybe we can give them a round of applause as well. Just for amazing, amazing. Cool. Shall we start then? 10 minutes, and let's just have this conversation. Oh, I haven't assigned. Oh. Oh, this is complicated. Okay. So in this quadrant, can you think about men? What do men want? Kamole Kamorao, can we think about women? Mole Kamorao, can we think about non-binary people?
Explain.
So, non-binary people. Like me. Right?
People, they don't believe in the binarity between female and male, so they are in the spectrum between.
True.
They may be like more close to female presentation.
Oh, that's debatable. I think it's clear.
Let's come back to this in 2 seconds.
They don't identify with either.
Yeah, so non-binary people don't identify as man or woman. And sometimes it's an in-betweenness, sometimes it's a completely outside of, sometimes it is agnostic, you know what I mean? Like, I don't even understand what you guys are talking about. You guys need to tell me what gender is because you need to convince me, you know? So that's what a non-binary person is. I'm trying to think of examples of like popular, can you help me think about like famous non-binary people? Demi Lovato. Sam Smith? All of them are American, okay. But yeah, so I think Janelle Monáe. Yeah. I'm thinking that even in your groups, there would be someone that knows or understands or has ideas about what non-binary people can be like. Go for it.
Barney's not.
Barney the dinosaur! Barney the dinosaur. But you were coming in. Give me 2 seconds, please.
Just 1 second.
Oh, men? Women? Non-binary people? I don't know what to do with you guys.
Trans identity.
That can be either. Trans people can be men, can be women.
Yeah, binary. Yeah.
Okay, I want to.
Should we do men again?
Let's do men again. Men are interesting, yeah? Let's do androgynous is closer to non-binary, you know? Let's do men again, yeah. What do men want? Okay, so 10 minutes. It's 2:30 now, and at 22 we'll stop there. Thank you very much for coming up. My battery has died, my phone battery has died, but I have notes. So, hey, there's load shedding and things. It's country. I wanted to begin by calling myself out. I'm realizing that I've been using guys for everything, and I know in certain spaces that can be very problematic. Please be kind to me, please forgive me, I'm sorry. I'm going to try to do better. And also in terms of, I kept saying sex is male and female. There's a whole range of sexes, there's intersex and otherwise as well. So that's me calling myself out, trash? Okay, so we start here.
That's the perfect segue because we got men. Trash. I'm kidding. Hi everybody. My name is Pumi. The views over here are not that of myself only, nor my employer. It's this over here. And they were incredible, so I had to write quickly. The very first question was...
What do they wear? What do they look like?
What do they look like? Let's go. We got masculine, strong, physically dominant, scary, bloody, violent, aggressive, and they think they're the cream of the crop or the golden people. Of course.
Want to respond? Do you guys want to respond? So are men bloody? Are men scary? Okay. Interesting. Are you a man?
Sorry? Are you a man? Of course I am.
Of course. Is he scary? Can you stand up? Is he scary?
Yes.
I think he's good looking. I think he's, you know, he's a little bit of something. Next one.
I think that really speaks to what our group was talking about. All these words came up, but it's not necessarily like the only thing, but people have the ability to be scary or frightening as a man. So, up next, what was the second question? I wrote it down.
What do they do?
What do they do? So, they are promiscuous. They are leaders, world leaders or lead. They don't cry, nor do they suppress, nor do they show emotion. They're controlling. They make money. They pretend to protect. They dominate. They take up space. They kill. They lie. They rape. They pick up a tab on a date. They speak first on Bumble. They hold grudges. They disrupt. They intimidate. And they initiate. That's what we got.
Do we want to respond? You don't want to respond. So we, of course we know that not all of the men in this room are like that.
No.
So then what do we, okay, it's fine, let's go.
Third question.
What do they smell like?
What do they smell like? Let's go. This one was interesting. I'm a very visual person, so let's go.
Oh, don't talk about our socks, please.
That is on the list, Baba. So, we got sweaty feet. They smell like sweat. They smell like musk. They smell like brutes. They smell like axe. They smell like battery oil. They smell like a Velcro wallet. They have strong pheromones. They smell strong. They smell bitter. They smell like balls. They can smell like blood. That's what we got here. I don't want any responses.
I think as we're going through, I mean, hectic. So we see that all men smell like balls. Wow. Maybe just do the last one. Of course, yeah.
They say the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. And this is the last question, well, number 4 was,
What do they behave like?
what do they behave like? Very similar to number 2. Okay, the last one. What do they want? Okay, yeah, that was easy. So we got money, power, sex, control, succession, legacy, and finally, to be loved. Of course.
I think there's such a wide range here. But I think the question I want to ask, do women not want money? Do they not want power? Do they not want succession? Do they not want sex? Do they want legacy? Do they not want to be loved? Do queer people not want to be loved?
No, they do. It's just like they do, but the society is not letting
We'll
them.
find out.
Let's find out.
Alright, hello everyone. I'm Liema, he/him. So we got non-binary. So now the first question was, what do non-binary people look like? And we had an interesting answer from one of the gentlemen. It basically simplified it to being umuntu. That's what a non-binary person is. But they don't fall within any category, any of the duality that exists. They are just themselves. Alright. And then number 2, what do they do? They do anything that they want. They're quite free in their expression, so yeah, they can do anything that a man or a woman can do. And then number 3 had to do with the smell. We did have a very broad range of answers when it came to that, but the main thing was that they smell good.
Yes.
Whenever you meet a non-binary person or non-gender conforming person, or queer in general, they typically smell good.
And they make sure of them.
And they make sure. And then number 4 was behavior. What do they behave like? They're quite liberal, they're kind. They're liberal in their thinking, they're open-minded. So those are all the things that we got. And number 5, what do they wear? Again, here we did have some discourse about whether they want to wear things that are non-gender specifying. Do they want to wear things that aren't necessarily for men or for women? And then we decided on they can wear whatever they want. So whether it's gender neutral, whether it's specified to a specific gender, that does not determine who they are and how they go about their lives. And then number six was the last question, which was asking, what do they want? Now this one, we all agreed, they want freedom. They all want to be understood and to have equal rights as everyone else. That's all. Thank you.
I'll be the first non-binary person to tell you we don't always smell nice. It's a daily struggle. But I think what's interesting is that last question is very similar, you know, wanting to be loved, wanting to be free, you know what I mean?
Don't you have women? Men. Back to men. Maybe pick your best two. Or your most interesting two.
Hello.
Hi.
I feel like I'm in a perilous space right now. And my name is Musa Nongwelo from Abashali. And I'm on the men's side. What do they look like? Body belt, structured. Fashion is tradition, no colors.
Oh, wow.
And the second point, what do they do? They're breadwinners. Something at least. Source of safety in violence. Feeling in control. Do less in work, but earn more money. Basically, lazy.
One more.
One more.
So pick whichever one, but one more.
Oh, okay. What do they want? They don't know what they want.
Thank you. I think, listen, y'all are being absurd in some places. But I think we're kind of, you know, we're rubbing up against it, right? Yeah, let me finish off with women.
I hope I do them justice.
So do I.
Because first and foremost, I'm here because of them. If there were no women, there wouldn't have been a generation of our people. And that's why I respect them. First, maybe, let's look at what our mothers want. I call them mothers, even if they have. What they expect from us. Oh,
wow.
Well, we are talking about what women want in the first. That's the first question. Here, there. This one.
Oh, try.
Ngiyabonga bakucela. Noma sovele nje ngingakubona. It's here, okay? Okay. Oh. So what do women want? What women want in this sphere of life, they want freedom, much as women want freedom. Because in a class struggle, the class struggle doesn't mean that you are a woman or you are a man. We are equally oppressed. And that is what our mothers want. And they want also equal respect of the agenda as Abo Mama. Because if Mama, what we know would be ikhaya elingena mama vele liyabanda. Yeah, ngoba uyolala ugoqa amadolo. Lowo.
Maybe two more answers.
And then okunye mhlambe kumele sikubheke ukuthi you know, I'm speaking too much Zulu because ngumhlali.
No, it's fine.
But it doesn't matter.
Please, let's do like a seat if I let's do the thing.
And then what they need to look at how women smell. Women smell like roses.
I will be the first one to tell you, Papa, that's not what the group said. You're doing your own business here. Thank you very much, Papa. Can you give him a round of applause?
What the answer actually was, I think there were so many frowning faces when so many of those questions were being answered. And I think that tells you a lot about our assumptions of each other. I want to say, first of all, when we spoke about what women smell like, we had one of the children answer it. And this child looked and was like, hey, what kind of a question is this? What do women smell like? And all of these questions were so absurd and impossible to answer actually, right? And I think that, go.
One answer, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. You know, even when Ubabamkhulu was saying that he describes women as mothers, even that was, really? Not all women want to be mothers. And they still deserve respect and dignity, even though they have no plans on being mothers. You know what I mean? And I think if we go around the room, you'll hear that so often. No, I am valid as a person beyond these categories. These categories don't... And I wish you guys were honest, because at each question, it didn't make any sense. It was not really possible to answer. And I think this group was saying things of our politics, you know what I mean? Of our discourse and how we use power against power. And, you know what I mean, push up against it and ridicule power, insofar as men are a powerful, dominant group in terms of gender. I'm in a tricky space. I don't have a lot of time left. My laptop has died, so there's no more presentation. But I have these notes, and I'm hoping we can go on this path together. Thank you for being kind as well. I think it was difficult to hear this. I think it challenged us not to throw a chair, you know? So thank you for being kind in listening to each other, even when we disagree. Ooh. So I want to talk about gender and power. And I think I won't go into the theory of it. I think we've also already really instilled that idea. But I want to talk about particular moments, in particular around intersectionality and gender and power in that kind of space. What's interesting to me is in the United States, the first people to be described as queer were black women. They were described as queer because they didn't fit into what Americans at that time understood womanness to be. And that's a profound thing, I think. And I think that we have similar things in our contemporary society as well, especially when you look at what the IAAF has been doing to Caster Semenya. Thank God they didn't succeed at the very end. She won, you know? Not enough money, but, you know, she won. You know, and think about that, and how often it is that black women in particular have their womanhood questioned and interrogated and made to seem like they're less than, you know? I think of Serena Williams, you know, the tennis player. I think of Michelle Obama, you know, how on social media especially there's been this bashing of Michelle Obama because her shoulders are broad. Which questions what you guys were saying, you folks were saying about men being structured, you know what I mean? That maybe it's not true then, you know what I mean? We can all be structured, we can all, you know what I mean, look different, we can all want freedom, we can all want money, you know what I mean? And I think that we know that at the bottom of our hearts, you know, and this absurd activity, which went very left. I want to look at, very briefly as well, and kind of moving towards final points here. I want to look at a theorist and a philosopher, Oyewumi Oyeronke, who is a Nigerian scholar. And she wrote this book called The Invention of Women, which is also a very provocative title. And what Oyeronke was saying in that was that in Yoruba land, or Yoruba land, which is common day Nigeria, parts of it at least, before colonialism, their society was not structured in this hierarchy that you were describing. on gender lines. It was seniority, it was age, it was accomplishment in that kind of way. And it was your age that determined, again, what you were saying, what power you have in society, what power you are given in society, what kinds of influence, you know what I mean? And so as you get older, you know, you gain that kind of centrality in that kind of society. When colonizers came to Yoruba land, what they began doing was assigning people to genders. They said, all of these people who have these body parts go over there, and all of those other people go over there. And they said that, and then they called them men. And they said, men, you're going to have jobs, you're going to work, you're going to have access to, you're going to be turned into labor, so we're going to extract labor, but at the same time it also produces then things that you were pointing to as well about income. And it produces these power dynamics then in that society that weren't necessarily present. And if we had more time, we could also look at how similar things happen in South Africa. Of course, South Africa has a different history to Yoruba land. We didn't necessarily have, you know what I mean, one kind of notion of how to structure society. Different ways were in different parts, different identities, different cultural identities, and otherwise. But I think we can begin poking at it, right? I think about the term Indodagazi very often, and the whole concept of female husbandry, and how in some cultures, I think especially in Xhosa cultures, when you know, there was a particular time when this is very more popular. When a husband died, if he didn't have any brothers, his sister would step in to perform husband duties with the family. And sorry? Even Zulu. You know what I mean? So here is a woman doing what men do. And we have this in our history, in our cultures, you know? So this question of what do women do, what do men do, it's an impossible question to answer. I think about izangoma as well, and the complicated matrix of gender identity with traditional healers and izangoma and otherwise as well. I think about Maskandi singers, you know. Here are men with the biggest earrings, you know what I mean? Singing in the highest pitch, you know? You know? So again here, we have our own histories, our own cultures, our own ways of being and doing that don't match up with some of the European ways of doing and being. We could slip in and out, you know? Moving into and out of gender performances as we would call them today. You know, gender roles as we might call them today. And it wasn't fixed, it wasn't a box, you know? It was fluid, you could move. You needed to move based on what you were serving in the community.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I'm not South African and I don't know supposed to speak Zulu or Xhosa or other language, but I heard that the local language here in South Africa, they don't have to pronounce like she, he, or they. So it's gender neutral, so any person is like, it's a human, not she or he, or it's right?
Mainly, and the main, it isn't necessary to refer to someone's gender identity when referring to them. We say umuntu, lo muntu, yeah, na, you know what I mean. And so we have these gender neutral ways of describing each other, but we do have words for that, you know, something we don't have then, because we move in these spaces. And sometimes when we go into questions of power, right, so let me come to this point actually, on that exact example. I don't have dates anymore, but there was a time during colonization, about a day just before, you know, during colonization mainly, in what we call Zimbabwe at the time was called Rhodesia, there was this thing called native peril. And it was this fear that African men in particular, if they were close to white women or European women, there was going to be sexual assault and rape. It was assumed that, of course, how can we possibly even imagine that? So before that big campaign and that big scare happened, in South Africa, mainly men were asked to be labor by colonial governments and otherwise. Even in domestic circles, in domestic work. Domestic work was exclusively for black men for a particular time. And I remember reading about it, and They didn't have living quarters. They either slept by the stables where the horses were or on the kitchen floor. And again, and then this whole big campaign, this big drive of native peril and fear and all of the rest of that. And there was this campaign to remove black men from the proximity of white women. And we live with some of these dynamics today as well. And that's how black women were preferred to be domestic labor in these spaces. You know? So what I'm trying to say there is that it's complicated, right? Because you, in this society, in a capitalist colonial society like ours, you need to work, you know? Governments pushed us into these corners where if you weren't working, you don't have an income, you don't have a livelihood and otherwise. And there are ways then okay, cool, then I'll be a man for you, you know what I mean? In this moment, in this context and otherwise. You can call me he, you can, you know what I mean, and otherwise. I'll fulfill those expectations. But it's not an expression of inward identity of this heavenly divine, I was born and then, you know, I was always going to be this thing, you know? What I'm trying to point to is the negotiations of gender that we make. We negotiate in particular spaces at a particular time. When my brother passes away, I'll be that husband, you know what I mean? And such and such. I want to look at, again, I'm kind of speeding through very headline ideas now. We don't have a lot of, we're way over time. I want to look at things like lynching in America, right? And how lynching, I forget his name now, I wish I had slides. Emmett Till was accused of a thing called reckless eyeballing. Reckless eyeballing was this idea that black men looking at white women was wrong. It was fundamentally wrong. It ruined their dignity. It defamed them. And there were fears about what was going to happen. Similar to native peril in that way. And he was lynched for that. In the main, I'm not saying that women were never lynched, but in the main, lynching was an institution or a thing. And lynching is hanging by a tree, you know, and burning and otherwise. A hugely traumatic and violent practice that existed in America. Mainly it was black men. And it was about their masculinity as well. You know what I mean? And I'm looking at that to say that, yes, we're all oppressed in very similar ways, especially as, I don't know how to kind of frame this, black people, as Pico black with a capital B, and otherwise. But there are ways that oppression affects us differently. There are ways that men in our movements can oppress women, can make them, by sometimes when we say that women are nurturing, we're saying they can't lead, is what we're underlying there. We're saying that, no, you don't have that power, you don't have that authority, you don't have that, you know what I mean? And so we don't want women leaders because they're too caring, they're too nurturing, which is a violent thing. We are doing to each other what colonial societies did to us, you know? Saying that you don't have these capacities, you can't do, you know what I mean? And yeah, maybe to close off, let me say that if we're serious about objecting to oppression, if we're serious about unrooting capitalism, colonialism, and all the other kinds of oppression that we face, we need to understand that they're connected. And I'm trying to point to that in some of these histories. I'm trying to say that you can't talk about racism without talking about sexism. You can't, it's not possible. You can't talk about classism when we recognize, we were saying that men are breadwinners. And we understand the histories of colonial societies and otherwise that have made men breadwinners, that have preferred men's labor, which is itself a kind of violence, you know? Saying you're not human, you're a thing that goes down into the earth. That's what you are. You don't have feelings, you don't want love. No, you're a thing that goes down and you die there, that's what you do. And in the same complicated space in navigating and negotiating our lives, now you're a breadwinner, you know what I mean? So we can't talk about racism without talking about sexism. We can't talk about classism without talking about gender, you know what I mean? And otherwise. If we don't recognize these connectedness of our histories and otherwise, if we don't recognize, I think Sibonga Mthembu actually had said this, that men are the white people of gender, which was hugely profound, you know? If we don't recognize that, and actively work against that within our movements and our politics and how we speak and how we understand each other, and knowing that there are needs here, you know what I mean? There are needs here, and we negotiate all of these. Then we're not being honest that we are objecting to oppression. We're just jealous. We just want to take the place of the oppressor. You know, we're saying, no, I don't want to talk about gender, I don't want to talk about women's rights, I don't want to talk about that, I just want to talk about race. But you're talking about a very particular kind of race. You're talking about black men. And you're prioritizing those needs and those interests, you know? And yeah, that's that. I'm not sure if we have 2 questions. I don't have any time. I've gone over about an hour already. Can we start there?
Actually, it's not a question, but it's more of a comment. Maybe some kind of enlightening among our fellow comrades that we have only one common enemy, and our common enemy is capitalism and imperialism. And all these norms that we have adopted them through from colonial rule up to the capitalist rule right now. And now what we need to do is to emancipate ourselves from these concepts of these capitalists and imperialists. Because right now, if you can ask someone about, actually, how can we get our pride back from the capitalists? They will go the negotiation route, say we must negotiate. And I don't believe in negotiations. Please help me.
5 seconds, Bob. Okay. So interesting, right? Colonialism brings capitalism and gender, like in the example of Yoruba land in Nigeria. And we live with similar kinds of contracts in our society. So to say we're anti-capitalist, to say that we're anti-imperialist, to say that we're anti-colonial, is to say that we want gender liberation too, in as much as we want class liberation. One more question? Or comment? I think there's one at the very back.
Yeah, what I see, I agree with Mr. Dube. We have to stop the ways of capitalism, and that is the way that we are going to fight against gender equality. Because of these days, if you are a woman and you are standing in front of the people, they just disrespect you because you are a woman. And if it's the men addressing the same thing that you are addressing, and then they listen to him more than women. And what I think is that we as women, we mustn't back down. We have to be strong, and we have to address more. We have to stand together so that capitalism can go. Because capitalism is something that is being planted. It's a seed in our mind. And it is not a seed from, let's say, ideas. Even we as women, you say, you are a boy, you don't wash dishes. And then you are a girl, you must wash dishes, you must cook. Awubashintshanisa abantwana bakho amathosi ukuthi umntwana azojoyela out there ukuthi umuntu, I'm not a man, I'm umuntu, I am fitting into a society. Nawe umuntu wesifazane uzazi ukuthi umuntu wesifazane but ngumuntu ngiyafita into i-society. I can address, singaba no-president womuntu wesifazane. Okwamanje asinayo upresident womuntu wesifazane. Why? Because asizithembi thina. And then even men abathembi ukuthi sikhulisa abantwana, sikhulisa i-country, yithi simobilizayo, senza yonke into, but they don't trust us as women ukuthi we can do it.
So let's close here. I think the point that I did appreciate was how capitalism reforms itself, and I think that was really, I think about the Che Guevara t-shirt and how it gets sold. You know what I mean? Now it's no longer a thing that can do anything. It's mute. Capitalism has absorbed it and said, like Doc Martens shoes. You know the Doc Martens? We'll sell you what a revolutionary looks like. Give us money. You know, we'll serve your own politics back to you at a price as content on social media. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so what I'm really trying to point to is how I don't know how it's possible to explicate women's liberation from racism, from classism. Women's liberation does it include white women? Does it you know what I mean? All of those kinds of questions. And so they're all together. And I think that our struggle needs to be an intersectional one. It needs to be both and. Because who gets to decide what comes first? Who has that power? Where do you get that power? So maybe let's close it here. This was a complicated conversation. Thank you so much for staying until the end. You know, I know it must have been hard. We disagreed, we tried, we were kind to each other. So yeah, thank you very much.